This morning, it's my distinct privilege to introduce Dr. Paul Chow, who is professor of Hebrew Bible and the director of the MTS. I assume that means Master of Theological Studies. Yeah. Program at Wesley Theological Seminary in Washington. Well, we're really glad to have you here.
Glad to be here.
This is really interesting. Professor Chow has recently published a book called Willingness to Die and the Gift of Life, Suicide and Martyrdom in the Hebrew Bible. And let me read this review from John Levinson.
Yes.
It's been one of your teachers.
Yes, yeah. One of my teachers.
Yeah. He wrote this. In this splendid, argued, creative, learned, and readable volume, one of the preeminent biblical scholars of the younger generation. Paul and I were at Harvard Divinity School, and we had the older generation. One of the preeminent biblical scholars of the younger generation offers striking new insights into no less momentous an issue than that of death and life in the Hebrew Bible. Buckle your seatbelt. This book is likely to change your views on that issue and on a multitude of biblical texts in the process. So we are ready to buckle our seatbelts as we welcome you to Westminster Presbyterian Church. Welcome. Good to see you.
Well, good morning. It's a splendid morning. So I'm very glad to be here with you. I recall I was here 5 years ago. So some of you may remember me, and I certainly do. And it's a pleasure to be back and to be able to share this time with you on the splendid topic of the Book of Job and trauma. I hope that it will brighten your day as opposed to sadden it. Let's see. I have a PowerPoint, and I have so many screens, I don't know where to look. But the topic for the next 3 weeks that I'm able to be with you will be the Book of Job and working through trauma. I've been working on the Book of Job for over a decade now, and about as long on trauma. And I thought these two books and ideas go well together. And I'm always always excited to have a chance to share my findings with you and to have a conversation with you. So I'm going to begin with an introduction and say something that is very controversial, no, actually very obvious to any of you who have opened up the Book of Job. And it is that Job is a difficult book. It's so difficult, well, let's see, that Saint Jerome, who is known to have, let me get settled here, who translated the Bible into Latin, had this to say: an indirectness and a slipperiness attaches to the whole book, even in the Hebrew. And I would say probably especially in the Hebrew, because in English, you have the words there in front of you, but in the Hebrew, there are many words that we still don't know what they mean. While it says one thing, it does another. Just as if you close your hand to hold an eel, the more you squeeze it, the sooner it escapes, okay? The more you hold it, to squeeze it, the sooner it escapes. And that's been my experience as well. So as we begin together, I was wondering if I may ask you a question. What are some of the questions and what are some of the difficulties that you found with the book in your past encounters with this book?
So much.
So much. Can you expand a little bit more on the so much?
Well, maybe challenges.
Yeah.
Tragedies, heartbreak, etc.
Yeah, there's a lot of heartbreak and tragedy that remains unexplained in the Book of Job. And therefore, it reflects some of the realities that we see in our own world, personal and otherwise. Yeah.
Why?
Why? Yeah. I was a teaching assistant, they call it teaching fellow for a professor who was teaching the book of Job at Harvard, and he told me to make a poster to advertise the class, and I simply put why the book of Job, come right. So yeah, why? Questions remain. You may have read this book many times, and yet profound questions remain about tragedies in one's life, about why God would do these things, right? Yeah.
Well, there are arguments, so there are things that are said, but then they're disagreed with, and so it's, you're not sure whether they're telling you to believe this or not to believe it.
Right. So if you remember, the book of Job, much of it is in dialogue form, right? So Job, beginning in chapter 3, begins to speak, and he speaks a lot, right? And then he is in conversation with his friends, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, and they converse for 30 plus chapters. They disagree. So you were saying, which one's the right one? Which opinion is the one that I should take away from, right? And so a lot of the insights that the book has to offer remain in tension, and it's our duty as readers to interpret and to be able to decipher which is what. So it asks wisdom of the readers, right?
Makes you think.
It makes you think. It makes you feel, right? This is dialogical, a lot of the things that happens. And then it makes you feel a lot of the things that we don't want to feel, to think about things that we might want to defer our thinking on. Any other questions or things that you have? Yeah.
The final answer from God.
The final answer from God in chapter 38 to 41, right? What is God saying? Right?
I am who I am.
I am who I am. It's like, right? It's like, I am God and you're not. Seems to be the answer. Seems to be the answer. But is that right? Is that the last thing that God says? I am God, you're not. Therefore, I can do whatever I want. Right? I created all things and you were not there when I did so. Right? Look at Leviathan, look at Behemoth. So the question remains, what is God trying to say? Is it simply that God wants to boast of God's power and leave Job in Job's place as a human being, a creature, right? Cowed and bowed down before God? These are questions. Thank you. I've spoken like a Harvard Divinity School educated man. Yeah. Any other questions? Because I want to have some of the questions in my mind so that as we go through this together, I can address them. So if you have any curiosities, I would love to hear them. Yes, please.
So there are questions I have of myself because through the book, the friends know what's right.
Mm-hmm.
They have their opinions. They have their judgments.
Yeah, right.
And reflecting on that makes me wonder, how have I been a friend to people
yes.
trauma?
Right. So you said friends with scare quotes. Like it's like, have I been that type of a friend to others sometimes? Right. They seem to know, and they're knowing and expressing their self-knowledge. I may have hurt Job, and we engage in this book sometimes as Job, sometimes as the friends, probably not as God, but right. But we read this from multiple perspectives, and it makes us participate in the drama that unfolds for whatever reason. So it invites us to live into the questions and the dialogues that it has. And that's one of the difficulties that it has, because it requires of us, our own selves, to be in that situation, around that table, looking at the suffering person, wanting to help, but not knowing quite how to do so. Yeah. You had.
How about the role of Satan in the beginning, right?
Yeah,
we have Satan and we have God, and like, hey, have you heard of Job? He's my righteous servant, right? Yeah. The dialogue between God and Satan referencing Job, and this. So I and the fact that it opens up with that dialogue, to me, that sets it very much like there's a tension already
Yeah.
from the beginning with the
Yeah.
book of Job, right?
Yeah.
So I feel like that those powers, so to speak, like would be helpful to be addressed also.
Yeah. So thinking about Satan, I'm not gonna call this figure Satan, but the Satan or the adversary, right? And the dialogue that this figure has with God. And what's going on up in heaven that has such dire consequences here on earth? What's God and the Satan have to do with our experience of human life? Yeah, with the relationship between those things. Yeah. Yes.
Well, the other thing that gets to me is having to live with uncertainty, because that is a very difficult thing for me to do.
Yes.
I want to know. But yet I have to realize that there are a lot of things I just can't know.
Yeah.
And learning to live with that uncertainty can be very hard.
Of course, sometimes I think living with the uncertainty may be better than the alternative. So
Maybe.
so I take it where I find it. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. The question of what do we know, what do we not know, and what do we do with the things that we don't know, right? And so this question of epistemology, what can humans know? And what kind of access do we have to the questions that we want answers to is something at the heart of the book. So yes, Job is a difficult book, but it's also a masterwork of literary and theological genius. I mean, think of just the conversation we could have on a single one of these questions that you just laid out before us, right? And that's because it is a masterwork. It is a work of genius. It is among the best of literatures written in the world throughout the millennia, right? And we want to begin to appreciate at least a little bit more of that. And my overall hermeneutic is that the experience of trauma lies at the source of both the difficulty. It makes the book difficult because it's dealing with difficult topics and difficult realities. And it's also a work of genius because it is working with difficult questions and is trying to respond and answer these difficult existential, theological questions. And so we want to do that. So here's the plan for today and for the next 3 weeks that we have together. Today, we're just going to look at 3 key passages. This is a Bible study, so we will engage in reading the Bible. And then we will ask the question, what are the type of responses to suffering that we see in the book of Job? And do we know a way to evaluate them? What are good ways? What are bad ways? What are righteous ways? What are pious ways, etc. Okay. And for the next 3 weeks, right, today we will think about the topic of bearing witness to trauma. What does it mean to witness, to fully experience and integrate the experience of suffering and tragedy in our lives? And then what does God and humanity, what does God look like? What do human beings look like when we take trauma seriously? Does it change? Does our understanding of that change? Does the understanding of who we are as human beings change when we say suffering is real and suffering needs to be accounted for, right? So the post-traumatic theology or post-traumatic anthropology. And then I think also want to deal with the topic of a decision against silence. I'm taking this phrase from Jeffrey Hartman, who was an English professor at Yale. And he started a recording of Holocaust survivors called the Fortunoff Archives. And he wrote a book called The Longest Shadow. And he begins that book by thinking that when it comes to trauma, the first thing that one must do is to make a decision against silence. Because trauma, the experience of trauma, as we perhaps know, is that it silences us. It silences the victims. It silences those people around the victim. It silences societies that have experienced trauma. So a decision against silence, so as a way of thinking about how can we respond to trauma, both in our personal lives as well as at large. All right. The story. I'm just going to start reading, and you can ask questions, and then I will just make some commentary. I'm sorry I didn't represent chapter 1 there, right? But if you have a Bible on your phone or in your mind, as the rabbis did, you can access that. But I will read and I will comment, and you can ask questions in chapter 1 before we get to the particular passage that I want to focus on. So there was once a man in the land of Uz, right? Whose name was Job. Anybody know where Uz is? No, because it doesn't exist. Like, if you said, I know, right? It's like, I would have doubted you because you're feigning knowledge.
That's where the wizard was, right?
Exactly, that is. It might as well be the Wizard of Oz, right? It is the land of Oz. What we know is about this place is that it's probably an imaginary place, right? It's kind of once upon a time, in a land far, far away, right? So it tells us that this story is probably not a historical story, and even rabbis in antiquity recognize this, and they said that the book of Job is a parable. It is a mashal, right? And should be read and understood as a mashal, as a story, right? But what is important to recognize is that that Uz is not in Israel or in one of the Jewish diaspora communities, right? So Job is a non-Jewish, non-Israelite character, which is somewhat, kind of interesting and particular in the book, in the Bible. There were born to him 7 sons and 3 daughters, 10, right? He had 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yokes of oxen, 500 donkeys, and very many servants, so that this man was the greatest of all the people of the East. He was truly blessed. He was both righteous, right? He feared God. He was blamed as upright, and he was blessed, right? So the implication seems to be that because he is righteous, he is blessed. That righteousness leads to blessedness seems to be the implied cause and effect here. Of course, this is the precise causal nexus that will be brought into question by the dialogue between God and the adversary. His sons used to go and hold feasts in one another's house in turn, and they would send and invite their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. So they had a good old jolly time, right? Kind of enjoying the riches of their father, right? Being served good wine and good meat, etc. And when the feast days had run their course, Job would send and sanctify them. Why? Right? Because he thought, it may be that my children have sinned and cursed God in their hearts. So Job was so scrupulous that he would sacrifice on behalf of the children because they might have. They might have. He does not know, but they might have, right? And here I think it's important to think about what it means to be human, right? A human being has thoughts that are internal to their hearts that other people don't have access to. They don't know. Job, even though he's a father, does not know what his children are thinking. And this same dynamic will also occur, I think, between God and Job. God says, I don't know what's going on in Job's heart. And the sentence challenges, do you know what's going on in Job's heart? Do you know why he is being pious? Is he being pious simply because he knows, he anticipates that there will be some reward down the road? Or is he being pious because he loves being pious? He loves loving God, right? So is it a calculated intent? But God does not know. So the same dynamic also exists between God and human beings. So what it means to human being, a human being has ultimate freedom, internal freedom. One's thoughts are one's own. And the Father, a human Father, and the divine being does not have access to it. And that's key, I think, to the drama that is about to unfold between God and Job. Another thing that I think will be important to keep in mind is that the word here it may be that my children have sinned and cursed God in their hearts. The word cursed in the Hebrew is bless. Right? It says, it may be that they blessed God in their hearts. Right? So the language is reflecting the piety of Job. It's using a euphemism to say, curse God, because they didn't want to write, curse God. Because Job would never do that. Job would never say that. So in chapter 1, whenever you say curse or bless, know that in the Hebrew is exactly the same word. It's barak. Right? So the translators have translated it as curse because, right, so that we don't get confused as English readers, but the Hebrew readers would have had to go to a different process. Is this bless or curse? And contextually figure out, oh, he must have meant curse. Right? And it's interesting because the precise wager that the Satan, the adversary, brings to God is, Job will bless you to your face. Right? Job will curse you to your face. So it's ambiguous, even there, what it means. One day, the heavenly beings came to present themselves before Yahweh, the Lord, and Satan, right, is Hasatan, right, in the Hebrew. And it probably should be translated as the adversary or the accuser, some kind of a figure who brings accusations against people, right, here. So, and this figure is not yet the devil, right, of Christian mythology, of Christian kind of worldview. It's still the Satan. And he is, it seems to be among the heavenly beings. Right? Where it says, one day the heavenly beings came to stand before the Lord. And the heavenly beings here, the Hebrew is B'nai Elohim, which literally means sons of God, right? Sons of God, the children of God. So these are divine beings. And the Satan seems to be in good standing, one of the children of God that stand in court with God. So the Satan has not become the devil yet, right? There's a history to Satan, intellectual history, and the fall of Satan happens much later, probably in the Hellenistic period. But when the book of Job was written, it was not yet that figure. Right? The Satan comes up in the Old Testament a few other times in Zechariah in chapter 3. In First Chronicles, I think there it becomes close to being the Satan that we know, but that's Satan, and so he's doing his job of bringing accusations against certain peoples, right, to have conversations, theological conversation with God, and says, and so the Satan says, God says, where have you been? Have you come from? Right. Satan, the Hasatan, the adversary, answered the Lord, from going to and from on the earth and from walking up and down on it. I was doing my job, God, get off my back is maybe what it's saying. And then the Lord said, have you considered my servant Job? Have you placed him in your heart? Right? Because God doesn't know what's in the Satan's heart either. Right? Have you considered my servant Job? There is no one like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil. So we know from both the narrator and from God that Job is the best example of a human being. Right? He is righteous through and through. There's not a fault to be found. But the Satan says, does Job fear God for nothing? Right? Have you not put a fence around him and his house and all that he has on every side? You have blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. Right? He's no fool. He's not being righteous. He's not being righteous because he loves you. He doesn't love you. He loves the blessings that he knows will come when he acts like he loves you. Right? Because true piety has to be unconditional, that it has to be uncalculated. But Job, the Satan says, Job is not that. You don't know that he loves you just because he loves you. Right? He has conditions. Right? And then the question is, how do you test whether or not a person like Job is righteous unconditionally, without calculation, all right, without anticipating blessings in return. Take it all away. Take it all away. But stretch out your hand now and touch all that he has, and he will curse you to your face. Right here again, bless you to your face, curse you to your face. And the Lord said to Satan, very well, all that he has is in your power. Only do not stretch out your hand against him. Right? So one can think here about why does God let the Satan, right, the adversary, do this? At least one answer is this: God doesn't know the answer to the question that the Satan posed. Do you know that Job, in fact, is giving you free love? That he is unmotivated in his righteousness towards you. And God, to a certain extent, God is saying, I don't know, because I can't peer inside the human heart. That is the domain of a person's freedom. So that is at least one reason that God allows this thing to go. And we will talk more about the problematics of that. But that's one way to read this and interpret this question. And so the Lord goes out, the Satan goes out from presence, and we know what happens. Right? All of his livestock that were enumerated at the beginning get wiped out. And then, of course, finally the children. Interesting thing, like the destruction happens in precisely the opposite order that they were introduced. Right?
What caused that?
Excuse me?
What caused that? God?
So approximately the Sabaeans, the fire of heaven, the great wind, and the Chaldeans did it.
Oh.
But narratively, we understand that they are the agents of the adversary, who was empowered by God. So ultimately, the buck stops at God. So God allowed for these.
Did you think Job was too proud? You need to be taken down a bit?
I don't know. I think at this point, God couldn't answer the question that the Satan had posed to him. Is Job righteous just because he wants to be righteous? Right? Is it just for without calculation as to his reward? Right? And God said, I don't know. So in order to find out whether or not he is righteous in the way that I hope that he is, he allows the Satan to bring these tragedies.
Is it because he doesn't know, or is it because he's going to prove the adversary wrong?
So I don't know, right? I don't know because the Bible doesn't tell me so. I know the Bible tells me Jesus loves me, but I don't know. But it seems to me cruel. It seems to me extra cruel to say that God knows that Job would be righteous and still allows Satan to do this.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Well, no, because he's proving to Satan that Satan is wrong.
But then he's allowing Job to suffer all these things, right? While God knows the answer already, according to that kind of conceptualization of the problem. I think it makes, for me, the better sense to say that God doesn't know, and therefore allows the Satan to go along with this test, because God also wants to know, right? God wants to know, because he wants to believe that human beings, and here's the best specimen, right? Job, that human beings as a whole, and in particular, this particular righteous individual is capable of free righteousness, free love towards God. Right? And he wants to prove that once and for all, because he doesn't want to live eternity thinking, are human beings being righteous to me because they're expecting rewards from me, or because I'm kind of cool and I'm worthy, right?
But it could also be just to defeat evil. It's a way of defeating evil. It's a way of proving the adversary wrong, because the adversary is not going to be convinced.
Right. So in that sense, right? God couldn't just simply say, "I know everything. I know what's in Job's heart," right? If God really knows, then the Satan would be. He could have just told the Satan that answer. Right? So there are complications here, I think. But does it defeat evil. In what way? I'm not sure, right? The Satan surely doesn't come back in the story. He plays his role in chapters 1 and 2, and then he's gone. Right? You had your hand up.
I just wondered, were the wisdom of Proverbs word of mouth at that time? Or was it written down already?
So it seemed so. One assumes. I mean, when the book of Job was written, when the book of Proverbs was written, is a little complicated. But it appears that the book of Job knows at least a part of the tradition behind the book of Proverbs, even if they're not
He
written
was
there.
sort of following that, then, wasn't he?
Yes, right. Yeah, the book of Proverbs is there. And then the Deuteronomist is that the book of Deuteronomy is probably behind the book of Job. So they knew certain parts and aspects of the biblical tradition that we have, including Proverbs and Deuteronomy. Yes.
Just going back to the Satan here. The assumption is Satan's evil. But if I understood what you said before, at this point, he's part of the court of God. So wouldn't it be inappropriate to attribute him evil to him?
Right. Yeah, he's not a demonic character at this point. Right. Yeah. Yeah. But maybe the question itself could be considered bad or evil, or causing a lot of problems.
I think it's a good question.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? I would like to know the answer. Am I being faithful to God because I think God's gonna reward me with something? Or am I just being faithful because I love God? Right? No questions asked. Yes.
Is that name the adversary the same as the Satan who appears in the Garden of Eden and tempts Eve to eat the apples?
So the Satan never appears in the Garden of Eden.
He doesn't.
No, the Satan,
the servant.
It's just a serpent. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So we read, Genesis and saying, hey, Satan's there, but it's not. The name's not. Yeah. A lot of questions. Good questions. Yeah. I'm confused. Now we're gonna look at what Job says. Okay, what Job says in response. Right? It's in the handout that I have in the room, or we can just read it on the screen. I'll read it and think about this as a response to what Job has just experienced. Right? Then Job arose, tore his robe, shaved his head, and fell on the ground and worshipped. He said, "Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return there. The Lord gave, and the Lord took away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." What do you think about that?
Because the Lord did it because he was too proud for everything he owned and how he was doing in life. He would have shown him a lesson.
I don't see that yet, right? At least not yet, right? There's no mention that Job is proud or that God thinks that Job is proud. But there is no attribution of what God is thinking, because to a certain extent, just as human thoughts are hidden from other human beings, and maybe also to the divine thoughts are also hidden from us, at least at this stage in the story. Yeah.
You asked what our thoughts on that, and it just sounds to me like he wants to be stripped bare naked, right? Like naked he came into the earth, naked he's going to return. And to me, I see he wants to be as transparent as possible about his motivations, his intent, his theology, right, to himself and to the divine being here.
Yeah, so nakedness for you has a positive sense here.
Very positive.
Very positive. Like, I am free. I have nothing to hide. Right.
Like, strip me bare, God, see me, know me, hear me, I'm yours.
Yeah. So there's a kind of resignation, and this return to nakedness seems to be a positive interpretation of the events that have happened.
Mm-hmm. You see it as something otherwise?
No, I'm agreeing with you.
Oh.
You're absolutely right. But I have other ideas. But that's what it says, right? Nakedness is a good thing. Like when a baby comes out of a mother's womb naked, that's a beautiful thing, isn't it?
Yes.
Right? Mm-hmm. And to compare his state now, as he thinks he will die soon, to that kind of babe-like nakedness, seems to be a beautiful thing. So I'm returning to a certain extent to that kind of innocent and pure state of being. That sounds good to me. Yeah.
It also seems to me to be an extremely positive, God-loving sort of thing to do, because a lot of people, if all these bad things happen to them, they would be cursing God.
Right. Here it is, God saying, the Lord gave, the Lord took. It's his right to do so. Yes.
But initially you said that Job is not Jewish, but he's worshiping to the Jewish God.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? Right. And it's not Elohim, just kind of a common name for God, but it's Yahweh, which is a proper name. The Lord here in the Hebrew is Yahweh, which is a proper name of God. So it's weird, but the theology here is one in which non-Jews recognize the God of Israel, right? Yeah, they will have different names for God in the dialogue, right? But here it seems that it's possible for non-Jews to be Yahweh worshipers. Interesting, too, that there's an invitation of non-Jews into the Jewish faith, Judaism, right? Which is another kind of peculiar thing about the book of Job.
Was it one person who wrote Job, or?
I would say probably not. Right. I see at least 3 different layers to the book of Job. I think the prose frame, especially chapter 1 and the end of chapter 42, was probably a reflection of a folk tale of some sort about Job. And I think the poetic core was probably written by a truly talented, gifted theologian as well as poet much later, sometime in the exilic or post-exilic period. And there are probably other layers, like the Elihu speeches in 32 to 37. Remember, this young guy says, I've been keeping quiet because you're older than me, but let me speak now because I have, right? I think that's probably even from a third hand. So at least 3, I see 3 kind of compositional layers in the book of Job. Yeah. What else? Nakedness is good. There's very kind of deferential and to God. God comes off looking okay. Doesn't curse God. Yeah. What else?
Well, and going back to, are we trying to convince the advocate that the advocate is wrong about Job? At this point, it looks like the advocate's wrong.
Yeah.
But we know what's going to happen is he's not going to accept this proof.
Right. So here, right afterwards, in verse 22, it says, in all this, Job did not sin or charge God with wrongdoing. Job does pretty well. Right? If you're thinking just about the wager between the Satan and God. Yeah.
And maybe it's telling us also about the nature of evil, as, along with telling us the nature of God. And Job is the character that's being manipulated.
Yeah. Right. To his great detriment. Yeah. I mean, there is here, I think, so Job engages in ritual performance, ritual action. He expresses his pain at loss by tearing his robe, shaving his head, falling on the ground, right? They're worshipped, right? So there is ritual action. And these words have reflections in other liturgical practices, right? We have, for example, blessed be the name of the Lord is found in the Psalter. And naked I came from a mother's womb, and naked I shall return there is in Ecclesiastes. So we know that these are probably reflections of liturgical practices of ancient Israel. And Job is simply using those traditional resources at this time because it to a certain extent expresses and contains his pain. He's able to both express it and say, naked I came from my mother's womb. There's logic to it. Naked, right? His recent loss of all his property and even of his children is a return to nakedness.
What happened to his children? I haven't read Job in a long time. Did they die?
They all died. Yeah. They got killed because a great wind fell the house when they were feasting in one of the eldest son's house. The Lord gave and the Lord took has a logic to it. What did God give? The blessing. It's time for God to take back the blessings. And therefore the blessedness of the name of God goes up. It's righteous. We want to be able to perhaps say these things. And it's also, to a certain extent, good that tradition the ritual and liturgical traditions give Job the tools with which to both express and contain the pain. Right? All right. We're satisfied with Job's response. I'm not. Because I think Job's, at least this initial response, seems to indicate a failure of experience, right? And a failure of experience is a common characteristic of trauma, right? Especially when one experiences trauma, one often does not experience it fully. One is not able to wholly digest, to understand, to comprehend, and to integrate that experience into one's consciousness. We know that we have medical proof, evidence that suggests that one's experience of trauma can put the mind in an altered state. That one sometimes has out of body experiences, right? There are stories of rape victims who witness their own sexual abuse as if they're looking on as a third person. There are times when we forget, we have amnesia or partial amnesia about the traumatic experiences. And so there's a failure of experience because the body and the mind, the human mind, and I would say in different ways, both the individual victim as well as collective victims don't have the capacity to fully experience and integrate this experience because it is so overwhelming, so shocking that it shocks the system into an altered state, right? And I think Job is, I have people that I wanted to read, but here is Bessel van der Kolk, who is a psychiatrist who does a lot of he's a neuroscientist. And so it scans the brain of people who have been traumatized. It says dissociation is the essence of trauma. The overwhelming experience is split off and fragmented. So the emotions, sounds, images, thoughts, and physical sensations related to the trauma take on a life of their own. They're not available to consciousness. And when they're remembered, they come back in intrusive thoughts, right? That are not manipulable like regular memory. Traumatic memory is rigid, it's wordless, it is powerful so that it puts you back into a state in which one relives the experience as opposed to remembering it. Kathy Caruth, who is a literary critic, and to a certain extent founded the literary study of trauma, texts after Freud and Paul de Man and others, it has this to say: the wound in the mind, as opposed to the wound in the body of traumatic experience, the break in the mind's experience of time, self, and the world is not, like the wound of the body, a simple and healable event, but rather an event that is experienced too soon, too unexpectedly to be fully known, and is therefore not available to consciousness until it imposes itself again repeatedly in the nightmares and repetitive actions of the survivor, right? So Job, I think, when he is, Job's first response is a failure of experience. When he says this, has not fully understood or integrated or processed what he has just experienced. Yes, he has his pious response, but it is more the reflection of ritual action, ritual traditions, and liturgical wisdom, but it is not yet his response. Just look at the failure here of accounting for what he has in fact experienced. Is it okay it's not okay with me, let's just put it that way, that he likens the death of all his many servants and his children, not to say anything about his property, as a return to nakedness and a positive nakedness. Is that right? Does that tell the story? I feel like he's missing something. He's missing that this nakedness is not the same as the nakedness of a babe being born.
Is that the stage of denial?
Maybe, yeah. Denial. He has not hidden what has actually happened yet.
That's sort of like PTSD now.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, yeah. To say that the Lord gave and the Lord took, is that good? I mean, the Lord took what? What did he take? Not just blessings in the abstract, but the lives of human beings, lives of his children. That seems like he has failed to process and to accept that a tragedy has happened of a great moment, of great importance. And blessed be the name of the Lord for all that. Maybe, just maybe, we see the cracks in the text at least happening. When he says blessed, does he mean blessed? Or is it the other option? Right? We know the other options because we've encountered this before. Does it mean cursed be the name of the Lord? That possibly exists because the word barak, the word bless, has been used to mean both.
When the translators do it, do they just make up their mind with what it's going to be?
Yeah.
Blessed or cursed?
Yeah. The translator has interpreted the text for us. And they could have said this is cursed because it's the same word that they curse earlier on.
Opposite meanings.
Yeah, go ahead.
So you think it's an ingrained deflective ritualistic response that we're seeing here?
In part, at least, right? It is a righteous reaction.
Right.
It is, right? But it is.
But it's a training, right?
Yeah.
It's habit, it's habitual, it's practice, right? And therefore he's deflecting the actual trauma and the root and the emotion. And he's putting a wall between A and B.
Right. The tradition has suppressed or repressed the true nature of trauma and the impact of pain and suffering.
Yeah. I look at the traditions, and around funerals and all.
Yeah.
Is yes, for that purpose, it protects us for a while until we can process it, because you can't process it right away. So you need that. You go to the tradition, it gives you the time and space you need, and then a week or so later you say, oh my goodness, I'm alone, I've got to deal with this.
Absolutely right. There is a usefulness to the tradition that provides us containers for the pain, because it gives us, as you say, it gives us space and time in which to exist, and later on we can start processing, right? And I think that's what Job has to do, because he hasn't processed anything yet. He has responded, but he hasn't processed. He has not understood. And I think that's what we come to when we turn to.
Well, he shows some grief by ripping his
Sure, of course.
head. I mean,
Yeah.
they're not
Yeah,
saying, oh, this is fine.
Yeah, no, the liturgy is giving him knowledge, actions, and words with which to acknowledge the existence of the pain and the loss, right? But I would also say that it is inadequate, right? To say that the Lord took to mean the Lord killed my children is inadequate, even if it expresses something of the bad, right? And the same thing goes for the response he has later in dialogue with his wife in chapter 2 as well. We won't look at that, but I think the same thing can be said about that. It acknowledges, right? He says, well, shall we receive the good and not the bad? And there the word is ra, right? Evil, or it can be bad or evil. So he acknowledges that what he has received is bad, at least. He's moving, but it's not fully there yet. We're truly expressing. So Job has to process. And just like trauma, right? If you fail to experience it before, like he fully processed it before, trauma comes back, and Job has to start doing the processing. And that's what happens in chapter 3. Right? The text is before you. I know I have 5 minutes. So this is more fun than I had imagined. Even though this is, obviously. So you have the text before you. I will just read it. And we won't have time to fully digest everything. And maybe we will come back to this next week. But notice the things that stand out to you, right? After this, Job opened his mouth and cursed. I was like, is Satan gonna win, right? The Satan gonna win? Is Job gonna curse? And here, the Hebrew word is not barak, to bless. And it's the actual word kalal, which is to curse, literally curse, right? So is Job gonna unambiguously curse God? No, he curses the day of his birth. Okay, and here I will read and we will have a short discussion. Job said, let the day perish in which I was born, the night that said a man-child is conceived. Let that day be darkness. May God above not seek it or light shine on it. Let gloom and deep darkness claim it. Let clouds settle upon it. Let the dark blackness of the day terrify it. That night, let thick darkness seize it. Let it not rejoice among the days of the year. Let it not come into the number of the months. Yes, let the night be barren. Let no joyful cry be heard in it. Let those curse it who curse the sea, those who are skilled in to rouse up Leviathan. Let the stars of its dawn be dark. Let it hope for light, but have none. May it not see the eyelids of the morning, because it did not shut the doors of my mother's womb and hide trouble from my eyes. Why did I not die at birth, come forth from the womb and expire? Why were the knees to receive me, or breasts for me to suck? What stood out to you? What do you see there in these?
I think he's a little depressed.
Another example of euphemism. A little depressed. He says, "I wish I was dead before I was born," and that's a little depressed.
Yeah,
You're a very optimistic
this is
soul.
after he's got sores all over his body, right?
Yes, by this time, yeah.
Yeah, and this is, I think anybody in that position, this is the way you would feel.
Yeah, he's being a little honest now. He's like, I want to die.
Yeah.
I want to have already been dead.
I don't want to go through this. I wish I never had to go through this.
Yeah.
I don't know how I'm going to take another day of this.
Yeah. He wants to foreclose the very possibility of his suffering.
Yeah.
Even if it means the giving up of all his life of blessings.
Yeah, it's just not worth it anymore.
Not worth it anymore. No, surely not. At least at this point, he doesn't feel that way. What other?
All his friends were still alive. They made it through all this cost.
So his three friends are sitting with him,
Oh.
and they're speaking with him. They came and they tore their clothes, their robe, and threw dust up in the air, and they just sat there in silence for 7 days and 7 nights, almost like a shiva, like a funerary rite. Oh. And now they're sitting there. Job is saying these things, maybe to himself, maybe to God, but certainly in the hearing of his friends. Yeah. What other things stood out to you?
Beautiful poetry,
isn't it? This is world-class poetry, isn't it? Yeah, I was a literature major, so I've read a lot of poetry. It's hard to top this when it comes to the expression of pain and sorrow, right? Yeah. Yeah. To say that something expressing darkness and pain is beautiful is maybe oxymoronic, but it is beautiful. Yeah, it gives words for those who are suffering. Yeah. Other things is point. I'll say a few things and then we will have to end. So I have a minute. Let the day perish in which I was born. Right? So that's the day of his birth. And the night that said a man child has conceived. So night and day, there's a completeness there. But already he is going backwards. Time has no, you begin with day and you go backward to conception. Right? And what does it say about the day? Let that day be darkness. Okay? So that day, okay, hear this, think of Genesis and hear this. Let there be darkness. That's what it said. Let there be darkness. Right? So to a certain extent, he is engaging in rebellion against God and God's creation. Instead of let there be light, he says, let there be darkness. Right? And he wishes not only his birth to have been annulled, neither his conception to have been annulled, but in fact, all of creation to have been annulled. That's the depth of his little depression. He wants the world gone because he sees nothing redemptive about it. And I think he is now beginning to process his trauma. And we will unfortunately have to leave it at that for today. I hope to see us many of you next week. Thank you very much.